Guess what percentage of college professors think they are above average teachers? Just guess. A recent survey of college professors showed that 94% of college professors think that they are above average in their teaching skills. Now, I can tell from your laughter this morning, and I'm sure we remember from our own experience of college or currently, that might be a little exaggerated, inflated, wrong. But you know, their conviction that they're great teachers ends up blinding them to the reality that maybe, just maybe, they're not. But before we laugh at the professors, I wonder how many of us would rank ourselves as the best surgeons, you know, the best high school teachers, the best priests. You know, we all have our blind spots, and we are all blind to our blindnesses. Maybe we're all, as the song used to say, blinded by the light. I have exaggerated self-image when it comes to singing. Or maybe not. But maybe we're all in some way or another blinded by the light of what's really going on here, the light of what God is really up to here, the ways of God instead of what we think, what we've assumed, what are our preconceived notions about what are the ways of God. You know, every single character in that gospel story you just heard this morning, every single one of them was blinded by the light. Every single one of them found it impossible, very difficult at the very least, to see the light, to see Jesus as light. First, there were the neighbors. The neighbors thought this couldn't be the blind man we knew, who we grew up alongside of, because he was born blind. And you know, this just doesn't happen in the real world. People who were blind don't start to see. Then there was the blind man himself. Even when he could see again physically, he still didn't recognize who it was who healed him or where it was that he might be found. And so even though he could see physically, he still remained in the dark. Healed of his blindness, he would have to still undergo some major training if he was to begin to see the light, Jesus as light. He was a bit stuck, too, in his theological theories, the theological theories of his day, most of whom would say, well, at the very best, this man could be a prophet. There's certainly nothing else he could be. Nobody ever told me there were other possibilities here. And then there were the religious leaders, the religious officials. They were absolutely stuck in their religious doctrines, the doctrines of their day. This guy couldn't be a prophet because the way we know God works, and this is how religious leaders tend to talk, the way we know God works is a prophet is from God, and a prophet from God could not be a sinner, and this man sins. How could God work through a sinner? Therefore, he must not be a prophet. And when the data kept coming against that, what do? They excommunicate him. You're out of here, buddy. Go. And then there's the parents. Great parents these are. When they're confronted by the officials, they admit that this guy's their son, But they wouldn't take any responsibility for what he is saying or seeing because it might meant they would lose their place in the church. And so they said, ask him. He's old enough. I'm not putting my neck on the line here. So you got the neighbors, you got the blind man, you got the religious leaders, and you got the parents, all of them blind, all of them. But somebody's missing. There's one other character in the story not talked about yet. And that's you and me. That's us. It could be anything, really, this blindness. Something that we keep bumping into again and again in ourselves that resists the truth, that resists a way of thinking different than the way we think right now. The one I keep bumping into most around here, I'd say, quite frankly, is that sometimes when it comes to the world of religious thought, our doctrine, frankly, I think we get a little embarrassed, you and I. Embarrassed about some of the things we say we believe. Perhaps even some of us here this morning who wouldn't think of missing Sunday Mass would all of a sudden have somebody find out we're Catholic and turn to us at work and say, do you Catholics really believe that bread and wine becomes the body and blood of Christ? And we sort of cringe, and we know this is going to defy reason somewhat and perhaps make us look like an idiot. And, well, that's one embarrassing teaching, perhaps for some of us. Another one is this miracles, like this story. You really believe Jesus did miracles? I mean, you really believe he would suspend the laws of nature? Psh. Embarrassed indeed. You and I are products of great institutions like this one across the street, great institutions of the Enlightenment, which the university is. Thus, if it can't be explained by science or math or a material world, it's probably not true. It offends our enlightened sensibilities. We're embarrassed at the suggestion that anybody who was born blind could ever be restored to sight. After all, we are sons and daughters of the Enlightenment. Reason, right? Reason, right? And because we're products of institutions like that across the street, our vast knowledge is true and real, and so we assume, because of how much we know, and it's not a small amount, that we're the enlightened ones. Surely, if anyone can see the truth, it's people like us, right? Or could it be that we've been blinded by the light? Here's the message. The message of the gospel story you just heard. Here's the message. Learning to see the truth anywhere entails a training that challenges our presumptions that we are already in the light. Learning to see the light, learning to see Jesus, entails a training that challenges our presumption that we are already in the light, that we are already somehow enlightened. I'm not proposing that faith would ever have anything to do with magic. But I'm also not convinced that it has everything to do with reason. I was reading the other day about some religion that believes we get a planet after we die. Looking at the pictures from NASA recently, I'm guessing I'll get Mercury. But we have to start letting ourselves learn, you and I, that there's more of the truth than we know, and we're going to need some training in this, and we're going to need some mentoring and coaching, and the Word of God might be a place to start for that. And because we assume we're in the light, we're so blind. Maybe that explains why Jesus could always get through to the bad guy and rarely get through to the good guy. Especially the religious ones. The man born blind is able to see Jesus because he had the advantage of being blind. We have the disadvantage of being born enlightened, and we're the ones in the dark. The dark to what really matters. And it is our pride. It is our pride that mistakes darkness for light. How will one of those professors that ranked himself so highly or herself, how would they ever come to the fact that maybe as brilliant as they are, he or she is a very bad teacher? The darkness doesn't know itself until it encounters the light. This man, this blind man, learned to see. And that's where you and I take our place in that story. At the very end of the story, he turns to us. He turns to you and to me, and he looks us right in the eye, and he says, if you assume you are in the light, if you assume you know, then you remain blind. And with that, all of us who practice our faith, and all of us who study theology, and all of us who consider ourselves good, religious, Catholic people, all of us should shudder. And with that statement turned directly at you and at me personally, with that, all of us with our advanced degrees should shudder. The truth is, our self-congratulatory stories of our enlightened status can make it even more difficult than ever to see light, to see and to worship this Jesus. We want Jesus to confirm what we have learned, not challenge what we've learned. We want Jesus to fit into our story and not have our story be judged by Jesus. The world in which we live would have us believe that our prayers following this homily, our intercessory prayers here or anywhere, are only meant to somehow show that we care for each other. Well, that's not a small thing. That's a miracle in itself to me. That you and I can feel compassion for somebody 10,000 miles away. But the world would not have us believe that those actually affect something in this universe. The world in which we live would have us describe bread and wine as signs, as metaphors, really, but not really reality, not the reality of real presence, not that the Christ is somehow really present to us in this mundane, material way. The world in which we live would have us explain away miracles of every sort, including this one of a blind man who now sees. Couldn't be that God would be glorified in this, could it? Our empirical bent can also blind us. So can our education. So can our faith. And always our pride. Might be time after Mass to go to that website called ratemyprofessor.com.